Hey everyone!
Hey,
welcome to the inaugural episode of Pop of the Morning.
Yeah, as you can tell, we were working out the kinks. We're probably gonna. I'd like to keep some of this stuff in here. The behind the scenes look of how the sausage is made, if you will.
The sausage is getting made. It is getting grinded up because we have not finished a single sentence yet.
Yeah.
in this introduction.
As Tom said, we're Pop of the Morning. If you had followed us the previous year, we were Progressive Pop. There's a little name change, a little
fresh coat of paint,
a little fresh coat of paint, a little update to the format. We've got video now, which we're both very nervous about, and I'm looking at I should have shaved my cheeks a little bit or something, but it is what it is.
You look good.
Thanks. Oh man,
that beard is resplendent.
Yeah,
it's majestic.
It's Redbeard, the Akira Kurosawa film. I always think of that when he gets this night because he would pull it to one side and do this.
Yeah.
But I don't know.
That's good. That's a good reference. If you're a fan of the show, or if you're just coming on board, my name is Tom,
and I'm Phil. And
what we do every episode is we get together and we talk about the things we always do.
Yeah,
that is pop culture. It's movies. It's music. It's TV. It's comics. It's the kind of stuff that frankly, it brought us together as friends in the first place. And like most people, a lot of our reference points for the world, a lot of the way that we make sense of the world is through our pop culture.
I mean, just
diet.
The beard thing, as you can tell. I mean, that's how I filter.
It's a great example.
My world is through pop culture, through films and comics and all that junk.
I think that's true for so many people, right?
Yeah.
And we got to thinking about this, right? We have been friends ourselves since fourth grade, and comic books in particular were kind of the thing that brought us together, and our passions over the years have waxed and waned towards movies and music, but it's always there in some ratio, some percentage. But we got to thinking about all this pop culture we had ingested over the years, and that old saying, if you are what you are what you eat, right? And so if you are eating junk food, a steady diet of junk, or if you are a much more disciplined person than I, and you are subsisting primarily upon baby carrots and baby spinach and all the succulent, nutritious veggies of the world. These things have different outcomes for your insides, for your longevity, for your relative health in the world. And so if you are what you eat, does the same hold true in terms of what you ingest, in terms of your cultural diet, what you put into your brain?
Yeah.
Is that a fair way to summarize where this show is coming from, Phil?
Yeah, 100%. I think we can say, people have often talked about, media diets or brain candy and all that junk already. But when we're talking about it, we still want to, consume this pop culture, but we're actually looking at the ingredients a little bit more. We're still
look at the nutrition facts.
Yeah, we're still gobbling up our M&Ms, but we're just going, oh, okay, this has 14% chocolate in it. What's the rest of the stuff going on? How's that impacting our body? So we're not going to say like pop culture. We still both love pop culture, so much, but we're not going to say it's like bad for you, but unlike food, we can, mentally process it and start, breaking it down and saying, why is it saying this versus that, and why am I observing this versus that?
This show, I like that. This show is like the digestion of what you've eaten. You have entered our metaphorical mental stomach.
Yes. Yeah.
Let's keep it in the upper digestive tract. The mental stomach that is breaking down what we've been putting into our brains all these years.
Exactly.
And if you can't tell, we want to do all of this with humor, with love and affection. We try really hard. The topics we cover on this podcast this season are going to range from this episode's primary topic, which is Spider-Man. on through what are some of the other show topics we've got coming up this season, Phil?
We've got Family Matters, and then we've got
the 90s classic sitcom Family Matters.
Man, I've got segment ideas pulled up, not this stuff, but
I'm sorry, I did not mean to put you on.
No,
the
that's
spot.
all right. We've got No Doubt. I can't remember the album name that we're doing though.
Tragic Kingdom. No Doubt's Tragic Kingdom. Which,
that's right.
If you can't tell, our bread and butter on this show is the kind of formative pop culture that aging millennials mainlined at some point in their lives, right? And you know, we have some love and affection for the stuff that we're going to be looking at. For most of it, for some of it, we maybe have a more complicated relationship. Mm-hmm. But we always try to find the best in what we're looking at. We try really hard to meet the author of the material where they are, to look honestly at their intent and work from that point. Mm-hmm. You know, I'm really happy that you're joining us here for the first episode. And I think, Phil, we should also acknowledge the other influence on this show. The show is called Pop of the Morning.
Yes.
Which is, you know, the pop culture, I think maybe we've explained. What is the of the morning part, Phil? Can you delve into that a little bit?
You know, that's coming from a format that we both kind of love in a certain way. It's the morning show format, which, you know, if you remember growing up, being sick, staying home, you get to see that, but it's always been a mystery, and it's always this weird combination of personalities and segments, and so we're trying to, best we can, you know, represent that spirit.
It's a melange, a weird potpourri of actual heavy news. Whoever is offering a paid promotion, whatever musical act was able to get out of bed at 6:45 to perform in the morning, plus traffic and weather on the 8s, and movie reviews, entertainment news, and maybe our favorite part of it, the weird dead time, mm-hmm. the awkward seconds and minutes when a segment maybe doesn't last its intended length, and we get some bland chit chat from the personalities, the hosts, the anchors. There is something about that. I like the way you said that. It's elusive. It's things that you catch a glimpse of, like forest creatures that you stumble upon for a brief moment.
Yeah,
you get bits and glimpses into this reality, especially when you're a kid, or I guess when you're an adult and you're a working person too. You get glimpses into this reality.
Yeah,
and so that being something that's always fascinated us, we're trying here to simulate. The experience of a morning show with two guys who have a fascination from a distance with the format.
Yeah, and
you can tell that I'm in the spirit. If you're watching the video version of this available on our YouTube channel.
Yeah, I don't.
Yeah.
I had a mug. I had a Donkey Kong mug, and I worked I worked at this mindfulness place a few years ago, and they always I forgot the mug at like a conference room, but they always, if you forgot a mug somewhere.
What does this mug look? This is a Donkey Kong mug. Was it like
had a
Donkey's head?
It had a Donkey Kong barrel with DK on it. It was really sharp. You couldn't put it in a microwave.
That's nice.
Though. It wasn't microwave friendly. I remember that. But yeah,
I mean, it's a mark of quality, right?
Yeah,
like a real quality mug should never be microwaved if you think about it.
Yeah, that's true, I guess. But yeah, they always take the mugs, put them next to the sink, and this time that mug did not make it. And I've seen, like, it being a mindful, you know, business. I've seen like laptops and shoes returned, money, like people do not steal in this place. And it's like a Buddhist inspired mindful, you know, university.
This mug
and like
this mug was so great you made a Buddhist steal.
Some Buddhists saw that and copped it. Copped my Donkey Kong mug, so I'll have to get something else at this point, but I don't know.
It's truly a mug of kings. Donkey Kings.
Yeah, and it's so hard. The thing is, I want a mug that, you know, represents something, and it was so hard to find something that I liked, because I like games, but I'm not a huge gamer, but whatever reason I like Donkey Kong. So I was like, yeah, Donkey Kong, that's something I'll get. Now I have no idea. Maybe I'll get like Godzilla or I don't know.
I would love to see a Godzilla mug, and I do think that's appropriate. I think Godzilla is something we should tackle on this show at some point.
I agree.
If you check back on the first episode of this show, available in the archive feed of this podcast, you'll notice that we did cover the 1998 Godzilla starring Matthew Broderick. It's one of the few films that we really have stumbled over, but I don't want to spoil it. Go check out that episode if you've got a minute. I'm proud of the episode.
Yeah.
But that is a hard movie to love.
Oh yeah, I still don't love it, but
not like any of the earlier, the original Godzilla films.
Yeah,
I love those movies.
I'm good if I never see that film again. But yeah, so we're excited to bring this to you. We've got, we're not going to have as many segments at all as the morning show one, but we've got a couple, in mind moving forward. And today's we're going to be like talking about. Today's was the introduction. And then the meat of it's going to be Spider-Man, and then we're going to have a little segment about my body falling apart.
Spider-Man meat.
The meat.
Delicious.
Spider meat. Yeah.
You don't want to know how many spiders we had to kill to produce this episode. No, folks, we're talking about the one and only Spider-Man.
Yeah.
I mean, there's not actually only one of them. There are many iterations of Spider-Man, but yeah, Spider-Man does only what a spider can.
Yes.
Phil and I, I alluded to in our rambling intro there that we have been friends for a very long time, since fourth grade to be precise. And one of the things that we bonded over originally, Phil, was our love of comics. I would say that was the primary thing that drew us together. We went to school at a pretty small school in the 1990s at a moment where it just was not cool to like comics.
No.
Where beyond that, I didn't know anybody who liked comics.
Yeah.
I was the only person in my family, as far as I knew, the only person in the school. And I don't know what you did or said that signaled your interest in comics to me, but we somehow found each other.
Yeah.
Do you have a clear recollection of that?
I don't remember. It was probably me drawing. That was usually the case. And you said fourth grade, but I think it was fifth grade is when we met. Because fourth grade, I met Mike. I won't say his last name, but I met Mike. And then fifth grade, we got into the class with the pumpkins. Where I spilled pumpkin juice.
You and I became tight in fifth grade, but
Okay.
I know that we met in fourth grade. But
we might have, but
right.
I don't.
Fifth grade.
I don't remember meeting in fourth grade. I remember meeting in fifth grade. But it might have. It probably was me doing with drawing, because that's how I met most people at that age, was like drawing stuff.
And Phil, you are quite an artist, and I gotta say, right, whatever it was that you were drawing, right, the comics were kind of the thing that immediately came to the fore. And for me, I think everybody has a superhero, right? Everyone has kind of like their guy, and for me, pretty much since I got my first Spider-Man comic, I still remember it was issue 364. Yeah. Issue 364. He fights the Shocker. That was it, man. Like I was down the rabbit hole.
Yeah.
And so Spider-Man has been my guy. By the time I met you, Spider-Man was my guy. For as long as I very actively bought comics, Spider-Man was my guy. And so I feel like I have a pretty deep and personal relationship with the character.
Yeah. Yeah, you've always been really into Spider-Man. You've always been more of a Marvel guy, and I've been like DC. I came in with like Superman and Flash. And so I have like... I don't have a very close relationship with Spider-Man and Peter Parker. I observe their I watch their cartoons and I'll watch the movies, but I'm not like super, into it. I had a couple issues growing up. But yeah, I was never like a big Spider-Man one. But doing the research for this, I became much more appreciative of Spider-Man, the character, and Peter Parker, the character, and then much more cynical about Hollywood and mainstream comic books. It was I didn't expect that. To be honest.
So that's an interesting journey, and I really want to pick that apart. I think, right, that for me, I don't know that I could have articulated this to you as a 10-year-old. But in preparation for this episode, I was just trying to kind of reflect back on what it is about Spider-Man that I think has made him so universally appealing.
Yeah.
You know, he's got the quips and the jokes. He has a wonderful character design originally created by the incredible artist Steve Ditko, who does not get the kind of credit that he deserves for the for the idiosyncratic character designs, the nerdy physique that Peter Parker once carried. And Spider-Man was originally, if you look back at the oldest comics, a scrawny. He looked like a teenager.
Yeah.
He looked like a 16-year-old kid. You know, I think the thing that appeals to me about Spider-Man, aside from the great colorful dialogue, the designs, you know, I think Spider-Man works so well beyond almost any other superhero I can think of. In that, you know, in his origin story, Peter Parker has this 1 in a trillion sort of accident that happens to him. He's bitten by a radioactive spider, and his first reaction is that it's the same as many real people would have if they found themselves suddenly gaining some incredible gift. His first thought is, how can I turn this to my advantage? How can I make $1 million?
Yeah.
In his origin story, he is trying to work this to become a television personality, to become a media sensation. He is shamelessly working the angle, and quite famously, you know, if you've seen any of the Spider-Man movies pre-MCU version, or if you've ever read the comics or seen the cartoon, you know that he quite famously, quite selfishly declines to stop a thief when he easily could have just reached out and grabbed the guy's collar, could have tripped the guy, could have done any number of things easily with his superhuman powers. He declines to do it because he says, it's not my problem, man.
Yeah.
My life is so great, I don't need to go out of my way to help anybody.
Yeah. Well,
and famously, go ahead.
Well, I just recently read that issue, and it was like a cop yelled at him, and he's like, "Hey man, I'm tired of being pushed around. It's all about me now." And for pages before that, everyone was dumping on him. Outside of Uncle Ben and Aunt May, everyone from teachers to students to like some bystander were just like taking a giant
random people on the street taking shots at him.
They were just like, "Hey, look at that puny kid."
And it's again, Stan Lee is great at writing these origin stories, writing the dialogue for these origin stories. You know, he's many things, and we can get into that in another episode. But one thing you got to give him credit for is he is great at in a very concise number of pages giving you the arc of a character. And Peter Parker, he is he begins his life as he's literally an orphan living with his elderly aunt and uncle, and people just don't like him because he's smart and not very personable. Yeah, and that's what it boils down to. He's not a bad person.
No.
And he's just weak. Yeah. He's just a beta male, so to speak. Yeah. Right.
And the thing is, like, it's not like someone called him like a wallflower in one of the comics, and he wasn't. Yeah. He would approach girls and like ask them out, and they would just flat out turn him down and go with Flash Thompson. Yeah. And so he was trying. He was just intellectual. He had crummy style and clothes, probably because he was poor. That's another thing that it's often overlooked
he's
now.
Poor.
And and he was thin. He was scrawny. Yeah.
So Peter naturally takes this gift and he says, "Man, this is my chance to turn my life around, to become a stud, to become someone that people look up to, someone that most importantly people will pay to see." Right? Like I go from being a person that everyone wants to swat away to a person that people will now pay money to see.
Yeah,
and that is it. My life, I am going to be. I think what a lot of us have this ideal in our head of what being a celebrity would be like. It is just nothing but roses, right? Yeah. Life is good. And so in this, again, the beauty of that arc, right? It makes perfect sense that he would feel this way, and I think that is a very real and natural reaction, especially for someone who has had the experience of Peter Parker. His first thought is not, how do I make the world a better place for everybody else? It's, how do I make the world a better place for me?
Well,
and of course he lets this burglar go, who kills Uncle Ben.
Yeah,
who kills the father figure in his life,
Yeah.
shatters the heart of Aunt May, the mother figure in his life,
Mm-hmm.
and he very quickly learns this lesson, right? The mantra that has been persistent through, at this point, 60 years of Spider-Man comics.
Mm.
Phil, say it with me. With great power.
Great power comes great responsibility. I can't remember it. I told you I'm not a user.
It rolls off the tongue.
I literally just read
It's
that
indelible.
this week. Yeah. But the thing is, like, we have to remember, like, the growing up poor thing, and him only having his elderly aunt and uncle, and him being so close to him. He several times makes the comment that he's making this money for them, so they don't have to work
Yes,
anymore. I
it's
mean,
true.
they
It's
rent
true.
their place. They don't even own it at their age. They're renting it.
It's the dream of winning the lottery.
Yeah.
You're right. I shouldn't say he's completely self-centered,
Right.
but compared to
he
what
was-
the
he
character
was
is
headed-
going to morph into.
Yeah, he was headed down that road. Definitely headed down that road. Even afterwards, like the next issue, he was like, well, I got to make some money, so it's back to the Stardom thing. I got to go back on TV. And the only reason he didn't, and he did it once, and the only reason he didn't do it again was because J. Jonah Jameson wrote an editorial about how much of a menace and a hotshot he is, and so his career was over.
And even he right, and he's again. We can get into that too because he is even he. My larger point here, is that Peter Parker, right, is as you said, a person who is put upon, right. His life is not great to begin with.
Yeah.
It's hard, right. He is an orphan. He is poor. He is not well liked by his peer group, by his teachers, by people on the street, for Pete's sake. He's given this gift, which he thinks is going to be transformational. He thinks his life is going to become effectively a fantasy, right? He appears in a comic called Amazing Fantasy as his first appearance.
Yeah.
And it's almost this Twilight Zone poetic justice sort of thing that, right? Like Icarus, he soared too high for a brief moment, and then the world smacked him back down. And the rest of this character's arc is more, I think, maybe more than any other character, maybe apart from Batman, rooted in his origin, rooted in this traumatic moment where Peter, for this fleeting moment, thought things were going to go well, thought he had a map in life that was going to put him and his aunt and uncle on easy street.
Yeah.
And then he got careless, right? He didn't seem like to be an especially, even his Uncle Ben didn't seem to be especially concerned with morality and ethics, not excessively so. But Spider-Man, right? Spider-Man's entire character is driven by this guilt, right? Batman is angry. He watched his parents get killed. He is driven by vengeance. But Spider-Man is not driven by a sense of vengeance, primarily. Yeah. He's consumed by guilt at his own self-centeredness.
Yeah.
Being Spider-Man is not a relief to him, right? It is simultaneously the thing that cost him his uncle. It's you could argue a path to redemption, but really what it boils down to is, for him, it is a responsibility.
Yeah.
Right? With great power comes great responsibility. Being Spider-Man is not a break from being Peter Parker. It is a burden that further makes the existence of being Peter Parker even more crushing. Because his obligations as Spider-Man make him seem like a flake to everyone.
Yeah.
Right? How many girlfriends does he alienate? Because he misses dates, right? Because he's getting his butt kicked by the Hobgoblin, right? And so this metaphor, right? That like, you know, when you're a kid, you have this notion that being an adult is going to be great because no one's going to tell you when to go to bed. No one's going to tell you to eat your veggies. You can spend your money on whatever you want. You have this kind of fantasy as a kid of what being an adult is going to be like. And there's a little bit of that in Spider-Man. You think, right? When you put on that mask, you grow up, everything's going to be great. But the reality is obviously far different as we learn. As an adult, as a parent, as even a son or a daughter, and taking care of your own parents. As a partner in any relationship, you have responsibilities. And from a certain point of view, right, while these things can bring you joy, from another point of view, they are also a burden. They also obstruct maybe your more immediate sense of gratification. Being a good citizen of a country, right, also is responsibility. Being informed, cleaning up trash and not littering. There's so many things in life, right, where we want it to be easy. We want it to be instant. The way Peter Parker thought being Spider-Man was going to change his life. And the truth is, it's a lot of hard work.
Yeah.
To be any of those things, to do any of those things well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's definitely put upon and has the problem. He's the most street level superhero out of almost any superhero. I mean, Daredevil is a lawyer. You know, people are able to maintain their work-life balance. He is not in any way.
He's all consuming.
It's all consuming.
And it comes from that. It comes from that grief.
Yeah,
he can't. He thinks any minute I'm not out as Spider-Man is a minute that I'm shirking my responsibility.
Exactly. I recently watched an episode of Queer Eye where they went to go help help a homeless advocate, or maybe it was a boat. Well, they often help advocates who are they're helping like the homeless or they're helping the climate change or pets. But the same story goes with these people is like they're advocates and giving up their time, and the business, the nonprofit they built around that, they commit outside of like maybe sleep and dinner with their family, they commit all of their hours to that advocacy, and then they get closer and closer to burning out. There's no balance, but what they're carrying is this guilt because they're like, my life is good, I have it good. I see all these people who don't have it good. I have to give back and make sure they're taken care of too.
If I could pay it forward just a little bit more.
Yeah.
Phil, I by day, as you know, I'm a teacher, and there's a degree to which that job, just like those other avocations you mentioned there, can become all-consuming. You can let that job consume your every waking minute because there's always a kid who needs a little bit more. I could always do just a little bit more. And you also, there's I think the dual burden, right, of you take on the pain and the tragedy of those people that you're working with or the cause to which you're working. And it can become very dangerous in terms of just your own mental health, your own ability to cope. And I think one of the cool things about Peter Parker is that while he does sometimes get pretty down on himself. I mean, he does spend a lot of time, his internal monologue, right? The thought bubbles, the narration in the comics and in the Sam Raimi movies from the early aughts. The internal monologue of Peter Parker Spider-Man is dark. He is usually just giving you a litany of his problems.
Yeah.
And those problems across 60 years don't change very much, right? He's broke. Aunt May is sick, and she's about to get evicted or default on her mortgage. And so before his own rent, he needs to help take care of her, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The list goes on, right? But externally, both as Peter Parker and as Spider-Man, he manages to meet these stressors with humor and kindness. There's a degree to which, again, his lack of boundaries is absolutely not healthy.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I think that's kind of what we're circling around. It is not healthy to be that consumed by your cause, however worthy that cause may be. You know, for that personal individual, it is not healthy, I mean to say, right? Like, it takes a toll. But it's amazing, right, that Peter comes from such humble origins, has been put upon his whole life, effectively ruins his own prospects toward happiness, as any of us would understand it, day after day, and he's always ready with a quip, an act of kindness, an act of selflessness, almost unfaltering through the run of comics.
Yeah.
You know, and I do think, right, that like for as much as he is driven by grief and guilt, there's this other side of him too, right, that is so admirable that, like, I wish I could carry a burden with so much grace.
Maybe he absorbed Spider's ability to carry burdens too. We don't know.
We don't know.
Maybe that's part of it. Yeah, it's so interesting to see Spider-Man in comparison to the other Marvel heroes, where you have somebody like Mr. Fantastic or the Fantastic Four up in their tower in the Baxter Building. Same with Tony Stark up in his tower. And then even Captain America, he's a street level, but he has this, government idea behind him, this idealism of what America is behind him.
And the resources of the government, right?
Like, yeah.
These are people who live. They are billionaires. They are celebrities.
Yeah. There was an early comic where Spider-Man is trying to join the Fantastic Four so he can make ends meet, and he breaks in, and then he asks like, he's like, I'm here to like audition. I want the top salary, and they're like, oh no, we're a nonprofit. We make basic ends meet, and then the rest goes into science and research. And it's like basic ends meet. They've got a flying car, they got the top of the line food, they got robot servants. They live in this Baxter Building tower. I mean,
and Buddy, the name is Fantastic Four. We're already filled up.
Yeah, and then Johnny Storm. What does Johnny Storm drive? He drives like the hottest cars, hot rods all the time. It's not.
And then Johnny Storm becomes the guy who torments him. Johnny Storm, when he sees Spider-Man swinging, will zip down and make fun of Peter Parker, make fun of Spider-Man.
Yeah, but these people. It's such so I come to these superheroes. I've been so cynical about superheroes in the last few years, of like, I'm just like, God, they're part of this like industrial war complex. This the industrial military
Cold War military industrial complex.
Yeah, and like so embedded in capitalism. They're feeding us all these ideas of like what should be the status quo. Rugged
American exceptionalism,
rugged individualism, all that junk. And then, so I was coming to Spider-Man with that same take, and then as I'm watching stuff, and I'm reading stuff, and I'm just like, no, he's a working class hero, and that's where he's perfect at. But when you take him out of that element, suddenly he becomes like this like weird, like almost like a thorn in somebody's side, like. Watching the newer Spider-Man films, I haven't watched the newest one, which is like No Way Home. I haven't watched that one, but the other two I've seen, and watching them, he says this closeness to Tony Stark, the Avengers. He has resources. He has access. Aunt May is young and vibrant. She doesn't seem to be struggling in any way. They don't seem to be struggling. They're like shrugging off, like, oh, you lost a bunch of like really expensive books for this specialty school. Big deal. No big deal. You know how much books cost for like any academic endeavor? They're insane. And so they're he doesn't have this like, he has these woes of like being a teenager and trying to balance that life, but he does not have this working class embodiment that we see in other iterations. Yeah. Which and I'm glad really irked me during watching those films, and then going back and reading some of the earlier comics. And realizing how much stronger
I'm glad I'm glad you brought that up, because I do feel I don't know how much in terms of our listener base, but broadly speaking, right? Most people's familiarity with Spider-Man comes from the movie versions, and the Sam Raimi versions were very true to the early comic books in terms of what you're talking about. He's a guy who struggled in all the ways that we've been talking about, and as much as I didn't particularly love these movies, I think that carried through, broadly speaking, in the next two, the Amazing Spider-Man movies starring Andrew Garfield. But you're right. When you get to the MCU version, the current Tom Holland incarnation, I want to be clear, I love Tom Holland. He's great in the role.
Spider-Man.
He's a great Spider-Man. He embodies that quirky, nervous energy. But I think, Phil, you're exactly right in identifying one of the things that I think, as a lifelong Spider-Man fan, I've enjoyed these MCU Spider-Man movies on a level. They are entertaining to watch, but they are ultimately very frothy, and they don't feel to me to have weight or substance.
Right.
in the way that maybe Spider-Man does at his best, and I think you put your finger right on it. In a way, the version of Spider-Man that we get in the MCU, it is of course an alternate reality version of Spider-Man, but it's imagine that day way back in 1962, 1963, when Spider-Man walked into the Fantastic Four's headquarters, asked for an audition, and imagine he got the job. And that's the version of Spider-Man we're getting in the MCU. Mm-hmm. The guy who, to a very large extent, is immediately accepted into the superhero pantheon, who has money and resources and technology at his disposal.
Yeah.
To whom money is not an object, because he's at least in some way effectively on the payroll of Stark Enterprises or the Avengers or both. You're right. It's sort of like a glamorized. It's a 90210 version of what teen troubles are, right? And again, I haven't watched a lot of 90210, but my life as a teenager was never quite like what I know of that show. Though their problems were not mine.
Yeah.
And so again, not to bash this current iteration, but I think it falls into the trap that you identified more broadly with this critique of superheroes as this manifestation of rugged individualism, right? Pulling yourself up by the bootstraps, or alternatively American exceptionalism and Cold War prowess.
Yeah.
That's one lens. Or again, another big critique that we've made on this show before. See episode 1 of our first season about Batman, where superheroes, especially billionaire superheroes, with all of their wealth and technology, instead of engaging with systemic issues like poverty, for example, just to name one, that drive crime, the kind of inequalities that in the real world are major drivers of the problems that grip our society, right? Inequality sits at the core of that. Do these superheroes apply their genius and their powers to rectifying these sorts of problems? Of course not. They go out and punch a bad guy who is a symptom of the problem.
Yeah.
Rather than tackling the things. And again, it's hard to fault Stan Lee and Steve Ditko in 1963 for not tackling that. That doesn't make for a very punching the Rhino in a face makes for a much more exciting cover.
Yeah.
But when you take out that pathos and that working class identity and that individual struggle, right? Part of what makes Spider-Man so appealing, as I hope I've got across, is that his life is not wish fulfillment. And yet the MCU Spider-Man, his life basically is wish fulfillment, right? It's basically a beautiful life. He is the beautiful people.
Exactly.
Right. And he keeps all his money
and they have
in
to
a big
do that
brown bag in a zoo.
They have to do that in order to, keep this narrative about superheroes, being American exceptionalism or being, capitalist exceptionalism. It's this idea.
They're another version of the celebrities that we fawn over.
Yeah, the most recent Spider, or the one that I watched, which was Far From Home, Spider-Man's, the core, as you said, that his responsibility and guilt from his Uncle Ben passing away is at the core of this character, and you can see it butting up against Disney's, MCU, because we have, Spider-Man with Aunt May doing a nonprofit work for the unhoused from the blip, and you see Spider-Man multiple times telling Nick Fury that I'm a friendly neighborhood kind of guy. I'm a bigger guy. He's a think global, act local guy. And you've got government dark agencies trying to pull him into this thing, saying, you're our only hope against this giant water thing that your webbing goes through.
But let's be real. Spider-Man's primary issue in that movie, Far From Home, is that he's on a lavish field trip across Europe.
Yeah,
for weeks or months, and not to put down anyone who takes a lavish field trip across Europe, But again, in terms of relatable problems,
I know. They tried. I think they tried to show it when they had Flash Thompson up in the first class mocking Peter Parker, because like, hey, this is a plane. It's like a bus, but it goes overseas.
Yeah.
And then you're like, and then they're sitting in this
a nod to his humble origins.
Just sitting in this international plane that has like amazing leg room, and I'm just like, wow, this is the best plane I've ever seen. But
yeah,
it's insane. So you can see this kind of like Marvel or Disney's Marvel trying to like pull Spider-Man in this one direction. And Spider-Man, having been firmly rooted for decades in this one area, being like, reluctant to go there. And it makes for an awkward, and maybe if you have media literacy, or if you're paying attention to that for a reason, for me it made for like a very awkward movie. I thought the acting was great. I thought a lot of the dialogue was great for what it was, but the premise and the plot was just very awkward for me, and I kept thinking like, they're trying to bring Spider-Man and say like, he's equivalent to Iron Man, he's equivalent to Captain America, he's equivalent to all these older adult superheroes in their
he's a
idea.
Teen heartthrob, he's a teen celebrity.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm sitting here thinking, I'm like, no, Spider-Man, if he had gone through all this stuff in his like normal area and growing up, he would be like, I think he'd be a radical. He'd be like revolutionary. He'd be like, he'd be thinking, he goes, I've seen my elderly aunts struggle with food stamps, for God's sakes. What am I doing? What are you all doing with this? This is not working. And
well, that's kind of maybe one of the things too, right? I like that there's so many things we could pull on here, but I want to pick on that for a second, right? This idea of a radical, an iteration of Spider-Man that is, if not anti-capitalist, certainly skeptical of the system. Because again, here is Peter Parker, who in the comics, right, in order to make ends meet, right, one of the beautiful tensions that's wrapped up in this character is that again, he is struggling to pay his bills while going to school, almost certainly taking out excessive student loans because he has a natural aptitude in science. He's struggling to keep his grades up, struggling to fulfill all of his obligations in life. How does he pay the rent?
Yeah.
Well, he devises, this is high-tech back in the 60s, but an automatic camera that can sense the movement. And while he's trying to defeat a bad guy, this automatic camera, right, he's trying to lure that bad guy in front of the camera so that he can get up-close action shots of himself beating up the bad guy, ideally, and sometimes actually what he gets a shot of is the bad guy beating him up.
Yeah.
And then he takes those photos and sells them to a newspaper that then uses those photos, splashes them across the front page, which is always trying to lowball his creative work, to devalue his creative work, because he's a freelancer, not a staff reporter. He literally is illustrating the stories that label Spider-Man a menace, this fake news propaganda tabloid that is run by J. Jonah Jameson. The only way he makes money is to further his bad reputation, right? He is that is exploitation, and he is absolutely party to that. But he's a guy who quite literally has no choice, because Peter Parker cannot hold down a regular job and be Spider-Man. Peter Parker cannot go and get a nice TA job, right?
Yeah.
Because he doesn't always make it to class. Peter Parker, to the world, is a flake, a poor flake, right? To the world that judges people by their ability to keep a 9-to-5 job, to have excess spending money, right? Peter Parker is a failure in all of those departments. And part of where I want to go with that too, right? This radicalism, right? Peter Parker is a very, very, very hair's breadth away from becoming the very villains he fights. Because again, most of the people that Spider-Man fights are not out for world domination. He's fighting the Sandman, or Hydro Man, or the Scorpion. Most of the people he's fighting, if these names mean anything to you, they're relatively low-time henchmen.
Yeah. Working class
who
criminals.
are trying to steal cash, some artwork that they think they could fence, or they're hired by let's say, the Green Goblin as a henchman. The Green Goblin is a multi-millionaire right? And he's hiring these poorer guys who, again, are not inherently bad people.
Yeah.
They're taking a job because they need work.
Mm-hmm.
And again, you can quibble with the ethics of that, but like on some level, they are also caught in the gears of capitalism.
Yeah.
And Spider-Man, you know, he has a great rogues gallery. Again, thanks to people like Steve Ditko,
Yes.
John Romita, just brilliant villains, and Stan Lee too. Brilliant villains, great dynamics. But one of the underlying dynamics in all of that, right, is just how petty most of these crimes are in the cosmic sense.
Yeah.
These are guys trying to. The Vulture, right, spends a lot of his time as a character attempting to get like money to pay for his cancer treatments.
Yeah.
Right? Like that's the villain.
Yeah.
And so you're right. Like there's a world in which Spider-Man becomes maybe increasingly radicalized or increasingly skeptical. I'm not saying he works with the villains, but maybe he's at least aware of the icky dynamic that's at play here.
Yeah.
That he is just as much a cog in this wheel, making you know, this establishment media tons of money, making his own life harder for pennies, because he's got to make rent and tuition and Aunt May's mortgage payment this month.
Yeah. And and he, you know, he's able to, probably because he has a support system of Aunt May and then later the larger superhuman community. But, you know, he's able to have that job and be a superhero. But like Sandman, Hydro Man, you know, these people, for the most part, start off as criminals. But if they want to go straight, I think I remember reading somewhere like the Absorbing Man was like at one point had a job knocking down buildings, and you had the union standing next, like on the sidewalk, complaining about him taking their jobs. Like they're
taking a whole man's cruise man job. Well, and we recently, I recently shared some comics panels. It was a Hulk comic, but it featured the Rhino, who is primarily a Spider-Man villain, right? And the Rhino is a guy who also wants to go straight, but his Rhino hide suit is like permanently bonded to his skin. He can't take it off. The horn, the suit, it's permanently on him, and so wherever he goes, people are shrieking, people are scared. Superheroes or supervillains are trying to pick fights with him.
Yeah.
He is literally a tormented guy who, in the comic I showed you, he finds solace in putting on a Santa Claus suit because the Santa hat can cover up the horn on top of his head and the beard will obscure his face.
Yeah. Yeah. And frankly, the world's not built for him either. I mean, he's, you know, 3 times as wide as a normal door. You know, twice as high.
The world is not
it's like
just as our real world. And again, there's so many ways you can pull this thread. Just as our real world, at least in the United States, most states in the United States, makes it as hard as possible for an ex-con, for someone who served their time, legitimately served their time, to go straight. That question that most of us have the privilege of just skipping over. Have you ever been convicted of a felony, right? Nope. And I get to move on, right? Yeah, most jobs, you're not supposed to exclude a person who fills that out as yes. But come on, are you kidding me? Why? Those people are not getting hired at the same rate as someone who doesn't, right?
Yeah. Well, you have that ex-con, and then you have, you know, some of these you could probably label under disability for some of these powers that without like their suits or their amped up usage, there's an argument there that this makes it difficult for them to have a normal job, normal life, normal apartment.
Right. Absolutely.
Normal
the Rhino
access
should
to
be on
the
disability. But we live in a country that makes it extremely difficult to access benefits like that. We're so jealous of each other that some guy might get a slightly larger piece of the crumb of the pie than I did, buddy.
Yeah.
And so nobody should get it. Yeah, man. I think his Rogues Gallery opens up that whole set of conversation, because his Rogues Gallery in a lot of ways are just as much a bunch of misfits as he is.
Yeah, and it's funny that his biggest rival is, as you mentioned the Green Goblin before, but he is Norman Osborn, you know, pretty much a rival to Tony Stark in a lot of ways. Tony Stark and the Kingpin. I mean, he's
Yeah.
You know, got his
Elon Musk.
He's got,
Did I say that out loud? Sorry.
He's got a
I
lot
thought
of
I only
like,
thought that.
you know, diabolical stuff going on there, and
Yeah. Industrial chemicals.
Yeah.
You know, contractor to the military, multi-billionaire playboy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Except instead of, you know, Iron Man, who ostensibly is a superhero, right? We have you know, Green Goblin, who is a literal supervillain.
yeah.
But, you know, I think, you know, kind of circling back on this and this whole thought, right, about Spider-Man and what it is that makes him so special. Spider-Man at his best is not wish fulfillment. Spider-Man at his best, to me, right, he is the embodiment of the idea that, again, whether you're a parent, a partner, a citizen, every damn day you've got to wake up and do the work, the hard work of being a good person, of being a good ally to those communities that are not as privileged as your own, of seeking justice in the world, of seeking justice in a world that does not automatically bend that way. You know, I think that for as much as Spider-Man has some unhealthy, you know, sort of obsessive habits,
Yeah.
I think that in a lot of ways he is also, out of all of these superheroes, this whole pantheon of superheroes, Marvel and DC, there's a way in which I think he's like the best role model there is.
Yeah, I think so too. He's the most human out of everybody that we see. You know, just based on his experience with life and work and trying to be a decent human being. Like, we all strive to do that. We all have certain levels of energy that we can put forward to that. He has a little bit more than others, and so he does put a lot more. But, I mean, yeah, it's just an amazing thing to see this kind of take on him, the working class aspect and the you know, responsibility around that, you know, kind of be squashed, because when a lot of his origin stories now, like, he gets it, and he immediately is almost like, you know, after that first, you know, Uncle Ben, he's like, I'm back on it. I'm like, responsibility. I got to have, you know, I have great power, great responsibility. But the comics were like, it took like 3 or 4 issues before he was like, and he was like slowly funneled into the area of like a superhero, where he like, there was a few panels where he's like, well, if I'm going to be an adventurer, I better update my kit. And so he like spent, you know, a page updating his web shooters and his belt and all this kind of stuff, because he's like, I was just trying to take photos of the Vulture, and he thought I was trying to stop him, but really I was just trying to take photos of him so I can make rent. And that was it.
Yeah. Well, it's great because I think that, again, speaks to his, you know, the essence of the character, where he's not a guy who has it all figured out. He's a guy who really, again, like so many of us, is making it up as we go along, trying to be a little bit better at whatever it is we're doing. Usually that's just being a person than we were the day before. Phil, I you know, as our conversations draw to an end, I have a history of asking you, would you recommend such and such a movie, such and such a show to people, and if so, whom? Phil, I would like to slightly tweak that here, right? Of course, would you recommend Spider-Man, and what iteration, what version of Spider-Man would you recommend if you would recommend Spider-Man?
I recommend Spider-Man. Definitely recommend Spider-Man. I think Sam Raimi. I you know, I liked his first 2 movies. I'd recommend that. And as far as comics go, I would recommend the earlier stuff, like Ditko era. To get
Steve Ditko. For those of you who are not in though, the Amazing Spider-Man, the first 30 or so issues are what we're talking about here.
Just to get a base for who he was and what he started out as, because everything from the costume to the powers to the rogues gallery is pretty much set up in those issues.
Yeah.
And so his personality itself is also set up in those issues.
Yeah.
And, whatever iterations come after that are based on that. And so you can kind of see where creators are like remixing, pulling down his personality in this area, pushing it up in this area, that kind of stuff. Because I was surprised because it's been a while since I've read him, but there was like points where he was talking back to Flash Thompson after he got his powers, and he was like calling him a meathead.
A little cocky.
Yeah, he's like,
right?
you meathead. And he's like, you Dumbo.
Yeah.
I was like, what the heck? And I'm like, I've not seen this on screen. I forgot about this. But it would be interesting to see a nerdy Peter Parker, struggling with bills, and then like start back talking to Flash Thompson.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a great point. Spider-Man is a character who has transcended the original comic books in which he was featured.
Mm-hmm.
However, he is very much a creature of that medium,
yes.
right? The serialized medium. And it's become trendy of late to criticize the Marvel movies. There's a number of things you can criticize about the Marvel movies. But one thing that I find slightly disingenuous is to criticize the Marvel movies for being one long, rolling, interconnected story.
Yeah.
In that way, that aspect of those Marvel movies is merely a reflection of the medium from which they come. The reason that most comic book movies have been, frankly, pretty terrible or have been only a qualified success up until the Marvel movies, as I think it has a lot to do with that serialization.
Oh, yeah.
And that's a long and winding little asterisk to the basic point that I want to make, that Spider-Man is a comic book character. And so Sam Raimi is a great way to get your feet wet with the character. But if you really want to see, the nitty-gritty of Spider-Man, if you really want to get a sense for who that character is, I would echo that the comic books are the way to go, especially those earlier ones. I personally, as a Spider-Man fan, also have a soft spot for 1980s era Spider-Man. We're talking roughly, the
Is that Ramada?
If you're talking about he's one of the main artists in that period. But if you're talking about the flagship title for Spider-Man in the comics is The Amazing Spider-Man. That's the original series. There have been many spin-offs through the years, many corollaries to that. But if we're talking about the Amazing Spider-Man series, we're talking about roughly like the 200s. Issue 200 to issue 300 is kind of this window where they manage to age the character up just a little bit. He's in grad school, but he's living alone. He's not married. His love life, his financial life, everything is still rocky. And one of the things I love about that era of the character is that the stakes feel simultaneously so low. It's so pathetic in terms of just the fact that he's desperately just literally trying to make his rent.
Yeah.
He's coming home exhausted and eating a cold piece of pizza because that's the only thing that's in his empty refrigerator because he hasn't been grocery shopping in weeks. Right? Like they really capture this iteration of Spider-Man who is just given himself all in on just trying to be a good guy. And there's something so charming about those stories.
Yeah.
And that iteration of Spider-Man, it brings in whole new. There's a lot of the classic characters, but it brings in a whole new level where you get the black costume, which ultimately becomes Venom. It brings in again a lot of like street level, low stakes interactions with other Marvel heroes. Yeah, I could go on, but that's probably my favorite era of the comics. And they have a little bit more of a modern sensibility. Those old Stan Lee comics and Steve Ditko comics, they're beautiful, but they also read a little bit clunky to maybe a modern reader. And those 80s comics, which are a little harder to track down, I have to admit, they don't have that. They read a lot more modern. They flow a little bit more freely.
Yeah. I will say, and I have not watched this. I tried finding it, but I couldn't find it streaming on Disney Plus. But I heard the cartoon Spectacular Spider-Man was the best animation version of him. But
I haven't seen that.
I haven't seen that one either. I tried watching another, but it was not great. I can't remember.
I got to say, to all of this, right? I am a father, and my daughter, from about the age of 6 or 7, has been quite taken with my Spider-Man comics as well. Second generation, handing things over to her, and she has no problem reading those early Lee and Ditko comics either. She has consumed the whole run several times. And in that same vein, again, another deep cut reference, The Untold Tales of Spider-Man was a great series done in the 1990s by one of my favorite comic book writers of all time, Kurt Busiek. And it's a companion piece to the Lee Ditko era.
Oh, nice.
It manages to imitate the style of art and writing without being slavish, and it's written from a much more modern perspective. It's a little bit more sophisticated in terms of its storytelling. Can't recommend that highly enough either.
I'll have to check that out.
Untold Tales of Spider-Man. Well, Phil,
Very nice. Does that wrap up?
I'm getting word from our producer. They're signaling to me from off camera that it's time to move on to our next segment.
Yeah, our next segment is My Body's Falling Apart. I thought of this.
How's that for a segue?
Yeah, working out the kinks there. I guess we could do some audio cues at some point. But
Yeah.
oh man, yeah.
Phil, your body is falling apart?
Yeah, talking about like a young, like super strong, spider-powered individual, and then I'm like here at 38, finding my first white nose hair and having a meltdown from it. It was sitting there; it was so long, and then I pulled it out thinking it was just a normal hair, and I'm like, I got to trim up, and yeah, it was stark white. It was like as white as this shirt was.
Whiter than your beard.
Whiter
even.
than
Your
my
beard's
beard,
a little
even.
gray.
Yeah, my beard's a little gray. I'm used to that. I actually kind of like it, though. Some days I think about dyeing it. I'm just not used to the rest of the
You think
rest
about
of my
dying,
hair.
or
I think
you
about
dying, or you think about dyeing it.
I do think about dying. I do think about dyeing it, dyeing my beard. But no, it's. I'm just not used to the grays popping up in other places, and that's like a new.
Yeah.
That's a new thing for me, and I'm trying to wrap my head around it and how I feel about it and where I'm at with my life, and being a 38-year-old podcaster.
Yeah.
And having my hairs turn white, and then also just being weak. I went upstairs, and I went upstairs fine. The hard part was coming down the stairs because I do enough walking that my heart can handle walking up the stairs. My knees were buckling under me. I had no control walking down the stairs. It was awful.
It's not the heart; it's the knees.
Yeah.
Yeah, Phil. On that subject, let me tell you about.
It'd be better if I had a mug saying this stuff.
Yeah, it would.
Oh my gosh, yeah. It's just, I don't know, man. It's just a heartbreaking thing, and I feel like it
Yeah.
I don't know. I wouldn't say it's heartbreaking because I never looked at it with my parents growing older or my grandparents growing older. It always seemed like, natural. I never thought of them as, being weak or old or, whatever negative connotations comes with getting gray. But for whatever reason, it happening to me is.
But now you're locked inside locked inside the body that's aging.
It's
you
body
are
horror.
The rhino, incapable of escaping your prison.
Exactly.
The prison that is your skin.
I know.
Phil, I think about that, right? You mentioned, right, how as a younger man you never judged your parents or your grandparents in that same way. And I've been having a version of that same thought. I think about when I was a kid and my dad seemed, and still seems to me, so strong, right? So physically there, so physically present. And it occurred to me, right, that this sort of like, I think we all maybe have an archetypical version of our father, this moment in time that's frozen in our head of our father. Yeah. And my theory is that maybe is like, around the age, for at least me, it was 8 to 10, that kind of time frame of when I was 8 to 10. That's kind of the version of my dad locked in, maybe with the most clarity. But man, the point is, right, that when I was 8, my dad is roughly the age that you and I are now, right? In his late 30s, right? and again, the way I feel, the aches in some of my joints where I've fallen off my bike or had this accident or that,
Yeah.
right? Where I feel it when it's cold, or I
Yeah.
feel it when my leg is crossed just a little bit too long. I feel it sitting in the Peter Parker seat on that fancy airplane. I feel the achy things in my body, and I know my dad must have been feeling it then too, but he
Right.
never let it show.
Yeah.
I mean, we could pick apart all of that, but like I guess the sum total of that thought is we have become our dads.
Yeah.
We've become our dads. We've entered the classical phase of dad bod, and
True. True.
it's in a certain sense we are from that point of view, from a child's point of view, in the prime of our life, in the peak of our life.
I
right?
never thought
just,
of that. Yeah. That's
and
interesting thought.
and just like Peter Parker had the idea that being Spider-Man was going to be this nothing but pushing up, whatever, like nothing but roses.
Oh,
He instead
man.
is, is a tough row to hoe. Being 38 or being Spider-Man.
Yeah. We're coming up. It's interesting. Wow, I never thought of it like that. That's an interesting take on that.
Yeah.
Wow.
Prime of life here. Well, Phil, there's another question I often ask you on this show. Phil, if people have enjoyed their time with us on this episode of Pop in the Morning, how can they show their support? How can they learn more about the show? And how can they find out what's coming up next in the world of Pop in the Morning and Cosmic Blair, which is the production company that you and I has started to run this show?
Yeah, you can go to cosmicblair.com and we'll have links to everything there. And we have, little cover art previews of upcoming shows and different things for Cosmic Blair. If you want to support us specifically with some income, that'd be nice. Go to patreon.com/Cosmic Blair. And then, as always, one of the greatest things you can do and easiest things you can do is share our podcast and like it and review it, give it a little rating.
And if you've got a friend who likes Spider-Man,
Yeah, if you got friends
tell
like
them
Spider-Man.
about the show. Word of mouth, whether it's online or in person, I think is, as Phil said, the greatest gift you can give.
Yes.
And money, but also word of mouth.
Yeah.
Is
And
huge. No, we really do appreciate your support and your vote of confidence when you talk to your friends about our show.
yeah, it's so helpful. It's incredible. Yeah, and then we're being more active on all social media. You can find those links on cosmicblair.com. And on Patreon, being more active, posting there, and giving out rewards. And we're like Peter Parker, where we think everyone should have access to, what they need to have access to. So for as low as $1 a month, you can have the same access as somebody donating $100 a month. Not that anyone has or will, but, it's there.
At least they weren't when we started recording this episode. We'll
Right.
check again.
Yeah.
Right as soon as we turn off the record
Maybe
button.
I'll be lighting my cigar with like a dollar bill.
That can be your prop
Yeah.
next time. Phil, one more time. What's that website where they can learn more about this show?
CosmicBlair.com.
And Phil, one more question for you. What is the topic of the next episode of Pop in the Morning? In case our viewers would like to do a little bit of
I knew you were gonna ask
homework.
that.
If they would like to be a little bit more informed, a little bit prep, homework's not a great word. That is a bad connotation. I don't want to leave a bad taste in your mouth. If they would like to get in on the thoughtful coffee clatch discussion that is Pop of the Morning, Phil, what should they read? What should they watch? What should they listen to before next episode?
We are sticking with the topic of youth, and we are looking at American Pie.
Oh boy, the teen.
That exciting! Oh boy, yeah, that's what I thought when I saw that too. I was like,
Yeah.
I forgot I put American Pie on there.
We did think that was a good idea, and we're going to stick to that because that's the
Yeah.
nature of the show.
I mean, we understand the influence American Pie has.
Yes.
It is a callback to 80s raunch. We totally understand the impact of teen comedies and raunchy teen comedies. Neither one of us are really connoisseurs of that specific genre, really.
Yes.
But having said that, I have seen American Pie, and I think American Pie 2. I'm not sure about the other ones, but
It's a film that I think for people our age must be reckoned with.
yeah.
It was there. It's, as you said, a coming of age raunchy comedy in the mold of some of the raunchiest comedies of the '80s, attempting to outdo that, and I think in terms of raunch, certainly succeeding.
Yeah.
Next week, it's not one for the kids, though. This is usually a family friendly show, I would say. Next week, maybe leave the kids at home
Yeah.
and join us for a slice of American Pie.
Yes.
Until next week, I am Tom.
And I'm Phil, and pop of the morning to ya.
Top of the morning to you too.
We'll work on that one.